Hello and welcome back to season 2 of the Risk Podcast. This is the first episode back. It's not virtual this time, we're live and in person. And today for the first episode, I've got 2 guests with me from Avantage Reply. I've got Vishwas Khanna and Rayan Bhattacharya. Vishwas is a friend, a mentor, and a long-standing client of Ingham Jones. And today he's accompanied by one of the senior consultants at Avantage Reply, Rayan. So I'll pass it over to you 2 for introductions.
Perfect. Thank you, Nader. Thank you, and delighted to be here with Rayan. So I'm the partner responsible for our risk advisory business at Avantage Reply in the UK. I've been with the firm for the last 4 years, and before that with Deloitte for 9 years, Morgan Stanley before that for 4 years. So my professional career will reach adulthood next year with 18 years of experience. So looking forward to that milestone. And my experience broadly, I started my I would say professional career in risk and regulation to begin with at Morgan Stanley, and then moved over to Deloitte in professional services, focusing primarily on capital stress testing. And then over the last 10 years now, I've moved into more strategic advisory, including operating model redesign and working with boards and senior executives to help their firms on their risk regulation journeys on an ongoing basis. So yes, that's me. Rayan?
Perfect. Thanks again, Nader, for having us over. Quick introduction about myself. So, as you said, senior consultant with Vishwas in Reply. Most of the work I've done over the past sort of 2 years, I would say, has broadly been around the risk strategy, transformation, and governance space. Covered a lot of different regulatory areas across those programs as well, across resilience, capital adequacy, branch and entity and subsidiary governance. So fairly broad set of experiences, and off recently doing a lot of business development and trying to make a full-time proposition as well out of emerging themes like AI, which I'm sure we will discuss at length today.
Amazing, thank you. Yes, no, we'll definitely touch on AI as a topic. We'll look at the key regulatory requirements that are happening. But just to begin with, I mean, it's 2 weeks into the second half of the year. What would you say the biggest challenges that your clients are facing at this latter part of the year?
Probably before I go into the challenges by themselves, I'd like to just use a favorite consulting firm, a term of mine, take a step back. Yep. So let's talk about where we are at this point in the journey of financial services overall. We're looking at, I would say, 5 super trends that are working around us and that lead us to this point, particularly where financial services firms see specific challenges that they need to now encounter. I'll come to that part of the story shortly. Those 5 super trends, the first one I would call out is the increase in financialization of our economies over the last 200 years. This trend starts back in the early part of the 19th century, where you have the Industrial Revolution really kicking off in the Western economies. And to support the Industrial Revolution, you have to work through a financialization journey where the economies slowly start getting more and more financialized. And that trend really hits a crescendo post-World War II when the markets start getting a bit more integrated. So that's the first super trend that we are seeing. The second super trend is that of global integration, which again happens starting World War II, where economies start getting more integrated. And that, of course, has an impact on how financial services starts responding to global requirements. That makes different economies much more integrated in complex ways. And that's one of the super trends that start having an impact on where we are today. The third large super trend is around information technology. Technologification or digitization starts 1970s and makes the operations of financial services firms incredibly complex. Efficient, but complex. The fourth super trend is the increasing challenges that come to us from climate risk. Starts around 1970s when the climate movement really starts taking precedence. And the last super trend I will talk about is demographic change. The Earth's population has grown 10 times over the last 1 century. There's increasing pressure on resources, right? So in all these 5 super trends combined together, the financial services sector starts getting impacted in very unique ways. The first outcome of these 5 super trends is that the financial sector becomes a utility, very similar to electricity or national defense, which means it needs to be regulated like a utility. You can't just say it's something outside the real economy and we can do with light touch regulation. We cannot. We need to be much more intrusive about it. And that's where financial services firms find themselves today, that they are increasingly regulated. They are under a lot of pressure because they are utilities. They are not just one more extra sector like textiles or real estate, right? The second impact of these super trends is that coming particularly from digitization, there's an increase in the surface area of risk, which is, for example, 30 years back, your risks in a financial services firm would sit in a real estate building in Canary Wharf, if Canary Wharf existed in the 90s, right? Now, because we're all working remotely, the risk surface has increased because we are able to work remotely because of technology. So the risk surface increases. And at the same time, risk velocity increases, which is things can go bad much faster than before. Which means financial services firms now, one, we are utilities. Second, we need to manage risks which are much more spread and work much faster. So regulation needs to take that into account. And the last impact out here is from a demographic perspective. And when I say demographic, it's two sides to the situation. One, as populations explode, there's increasing cost of living crisis. There's increasing pressure on people to have their livelihoods. That directly translates into financial services and banks' balance sheets. The risks grow there because there are more people and they're struggling in different ways because of cost of living crisis. And second, from a supply side, these are people that firms employ. And we see a significant challenge on that side of operations as well, because as trends change, as requirements change, the demands on those individuals to perform risk regulation functions, for example, change significantly. So if I was to summarize this then and say, what are the challenges, answer your question specifically now, what are the challenges that firms are facing? They're driven by these 5 super trends, but I'll summarize them in 3 or 4 big themes. The first, when you call financial services firms as utilities, is the concept of operational resilience, which is we just don't worry now about your financial resilience, that you'll have enough money if something goes wrong, but can you actually provide the service that you're built to provide to the real economy when things go bad? And that's the reason why over the last 10 years, we've seen regulators come up with the Digital Operation Resilience Act or the operation resilience requirements from the PRA or the FCA. So that's the first big block of work that our clients are struggling with, or financial services firms now find themselves doing. The second trend is around from a technologification perspective. Obviously, there's an impact of big data. As financial services firms, there's a huge amount of data that firms are processing. That needs to be timely, have integrity, be complete, be consistent, and so on. And so there's a huge amount of focus there. And particularly legacy firms are struggling significantly with that challenge. The second one. And the third one that I'll highlight is around sustainability, going from the 4th super trend, which is climate risk. So sustainability is a real issue that firms are grappling with, because while it's a real economy issue, not necessarily the financial economy issue or financial services issue, but because financial services is a utility again, it needs to respond to that challenge to enable the real sector to respond to that challenge. It's a long-winded answer, but those 3 trends I'll call out: DORA or operational resilience, sustainability, and data.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose looking at these challenges, where there are challenges, there's always opportunities, especially for consultancy. So what are the potential opportunities for risk functions to create efficiencies in the face of these challenges?
I think just to contextualize with Vishwas's points as well, I think the approach to solutionizing for some of these challenges, I think, stems from the history people have already had within banks or financial institutions and how they've dealt with similar challenges historically. So if I take something like resilience, for example, or sustainability, as concepts or problems, they're not unique to industries. I mean, an industry like oil and gas or chemicals, for example, has been talking about sustainability way before financial services have. Or if I talk about resilience, something like the aerospace industry or the aircrafts and manufacturing industry have talked about resilience for many more years than financial services have, because it's much more critical for them. It's much more existential for them. You cannot, under any circumstance, have a resilience issue going really wrong in aircraft because people's lives are at stake. So similarly for oil and gas. And even within some of these concepts, I think there's a history of how solutionizing has evolved over the years. So if I take resilience, for example, I mean, we're talking about resilience now as if it's a new concept, but I don't really think it's a completely new concept. I think it has evolved from similar disciplines over the last 10 to 20 years, starting with something as basic as operational risk, where the core fundamental is don't get hit, to make sure there's no incident. And it's evolved into similar disciplines like disaster recovery. If something goes wrong, how do we recover from that? Business continuity of, if there's a disruption, how do I continue delivering the critical operations? And more recently, we have things like OCIR, operational continuity in resolution. And I think all of these similar and related disciplines have sort of coagulated into what we're calling operational resilience today. And I think solutionizing for something like resilience or sustainability, I think will stem from the historic wisdom we've gained across solving for all of those issues over the past 20 years. So in terms of how do you solve it, I think at the root of it, I will go back to the point to say financial services is a people business. I mean, we make all of these strategy decks and risk models, but fundamentally, it's a people business. If people don't function the way they're supposed to, things go wrong. And I will start with a more vague solution first and perhaps go into more precise solutions. So something fundamentally, I think culture will shape the way you handle all of these problems. Governance, the way senior management functions or the management body itself functions, has cascading effects on how you address some of these problems. And these are themes that both the PRA in the UK and the ECB and even the Fed in the US are picking up on. If you read the priority statements from 2024, they're talking about things like the importance of risk culture. They're talking about things like the steering capability of the management body. And I think if you get those fundamental people issues right first, you're setting yourself for a very good foundation on how you will solve these issues from a technical standpoint as well, applying the more technical sustainability, climate risk knowledge, or the resilience and the operational risk knowledge to solve some of these issues. So I think that's the first step to get the people paradigm right. After that, you move to more specific capabilities. And I think reassessing the way your functions work, the way your risk functions across the three lines of defense work, or reassessing if your operating models are fit for purpose to truly understand, do you actually have the capabilities that the regulation is asking for? And even beyond the capabilities, do the people you employ within these functions, do they actually have the capabilities to do what the regulation is asking them to do? That becomes the next step once you solve the people problem, to actually assess whether your function is fit for purpose. And once you've done that high-level gap analysis, then you start solutionizing in terms of, I want to build these three capabilities, because it not only solves for the regulation of checking the compliance box, but it's beyond that. It fundamentally changes the way I manage risks within the organization, or it changes the way I create efficiencies within the organization. And the risk function then truly becomes an agent of growth within the organization and not a blocker for innovation. So I think those should be the key three phases.
Okay, so just touching on that first phase, the people function. Yeah. How do CROs embed a people-first risk culture within their organization?
I think that's a fairly deep question, and I think it should start with the CRO themselves introspecting what the exact mandate of their role is. And I think if the CROs can truly articulate what their mission for the risk function is, and truly become a risk champion, a word which we commonly use in the industry, to actually say, this is my mission as the CRO. These are the three things I want to achieve in the next 1 year versus 3 years versus 5 years. I think if you can articulate that mission statement well, you're starting at a fairly strong point. After that, I think it goes back to that second phase I spoke about, which is assessing, is my function actually fit for purpose? Do I have the right people? Do I have the right skills? Do I have a diverse range of skills? Because risk is not a one-dimensional discipline. We will need strong qualitative or regulatory skills to interpret regulation across more quantitative skills in terms of understanding the numerical side of it. So I think once you articulate that strategy, assess if your function is fit for purpose. And then the final step I would say is, again, to truly give incentive to people to do what they do, whether that be through formal HR process to say, these are your objectives for the year, or giving people purpose to actually tell them, why is it we're doing what we're doing? if I'm a resilience expert within a bank, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's beyond saying I'm doing this to comply with DORA, I'm doing this to comply with the UK regulation, but there's a fundamental role in actually making the bank stay on its toes if something goes wrong, or even in sustainability. I think if you can articulate that purpose, and it starts with the CRO understanding their purpose themselves, assessing whether their functions are fit for purpose, and then giving that purpose and translating that for their staff to explain why they should do what they do.
While I think the CROs are seen as the change agents when it comes to risk culture by itself is a responsibility of entire organizations and the entire executive teams in a way. And ultimately, the risk culture is built on some of the things that you just said, Rayan. There are three fundamental building blocks out here. The first one is tone from the top. How do we communicate what risk culture means, the mission, what we stand for, what do we believe? The second is around, again, remuneration incentive. Are people incentivized to do the right things? And third is the enabling infrastructure, which allows the tone from the top and the incentives to work and orchestrate themselves in a day-to-day behavior of individuals, which is the framework, the policies, the documentation, the controls that I establish around things. And I really liked what Rayan said about understanding your purpose, because that's the foundation from where this starts. I was in a meeting with one of our client CEOs beginning of this week, and he said something very instrumental to me. And when we run a business, what are we doing? Are we providing financial services? Is our function or purpose to provide a bank account to an individual to allow for mortgages? Not enough. There's something more that we do. We enable people to live their lives in a much more compelling, a much more fuller way compared to what they would without us. So it's a bigger purpose than that. But hold on, that's not enough actually. Because we, as one of the most significant firms, financial services firms in the world, we are responsible for how the free world operates. If we don't exist as one big firm, the overall financial system is impacted. And in that, the destiny of the free world is impacted actually. So look at what happened with CS. If that was allowed to become a contagion effect, the free world would have been impacted. The Western world would have been impacted in the way it operates. So my purpose is not just to open a bank account. It's not just to provide a financial service. It's about maintaining the fabric of society at the end of the day. It's a bigger calling. It's probably an exaggeration in some way, but it's not untrue. It is true. And when people realize that that's the real purpose they're solving in doing sometimes smaller things, but which lead to big outcomes, I think it brings home what risk culture means. Again, building on the point on operational resilience. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I was at M&S. I was trying to buy breakfast. And none of the counters was working to process electronic payments. You couldn't work with cards. There were long queues forming. And people couldn't get breakfast. There are 30 people standing in a line. And just a simple example, if that was to be replicated across multiple M&S stores, you can imagine what's happening. And it's because why? Because the financial services firms and the people they serve are not able to connect to each other. That's what it is. Our daily lives are so impacted by that people have to realize that risk culture is a bigger calling. It's not a tick the box exercise. Again, we use that phrase quite a lot, but it's not a tick the box exercise. It has real impact on real people. Things go wrong, real lives get impacted.
Yeah. When you break it down from the foundational aspect, it's responsibility and understanding of purpose.
I think it's duty at the end of the day. It's duty that financial services firms owe to their customers on one side, but broader society on this other side, because it's a utility. Everybody's impacted if something goes wrong. So I think that's something, it makes people a bit more humble about what they do actually. It empowers them, but makes them humble. Okay, this is what it means when I go into the office and do something about it.
Yeah, understanding the impact.
Understanding the impact at a very micro level.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Interesting. Thank you. So looking at H2 again and looking at regulation, what would you say the key regulatory requirements are that firms should be acting upon as we move into H2 of 2024?
A couple of things, and Brian, please jump in. We'll keep it fairly fluid. There are a number of regulatory requirements or trends that are reaching ahead in 2024, 2025. And these are not small ticket changes. We are talking about significant multi-decade programs of work that start their first steps in the next 6 to 12 months. We've touched upon DORA, for example, or Operation Resilience in the UK. The first compliance deadlines are around Q1 of next year. But like financial regulation or financial adequacy regulation, which started in the early 80s, and it really took 30 years to bed down, we are starting this journey. This is a multi-decade program of work. And firms which set the right foundation in terms of having the right risk culture to manage this transition, having the right insight about their own organization in terms of understanding how do we really work, and putting in place the controls, the operating model, the policies and procedures around it, will potentially be the winners out here. So that's a big priority for us as consultants or advisors and for our clients. And within that, one of the things that we've noticed is that when firms become too big, they become quite siloed. And at the more senior levels or even the mid levels, there's limited understanding of how we actually do things. All of us are responsible for chunks of work that we do. But people who have a holistic view of the end-to-end value chain, it's really difficult to understand that. So a lot of the firms over the last couple of years have been on a journey of self-discovery. How are we structured? Who does what where? We don't know. Some people know, but there's no organization-wide awareness of that. And operational resilience has forced people to look at the mirror and say, okay, this is what we do. And we need to rethink how we do these things because there are so many of these considerations that we need to solve for. So operational resilience is one huge issue that firms are grappling with. On a more specific basis, the Capital Requirement Regulation, CRR3, is a significant area of concern at the moment for several of our clients, as is for the whole industry at the moment. While I would not say that the change is exponential, but because we're talking about specific and quite fundamental changes when it comes to data flows, calculation methodologies, and understanding our outputs, it will have a significant impact on how firms run their day-to-day processes. And the third one, I'll go back to risk data to start with, but broader data anyways. How will firms need to leverage the data that they have to create insight and to manage their business in a much better way?
There's two things that risk and reg functions need to get right over the next 1 to 5 years or even a decade, as Vishwas said. I think the first thing, and I won't go into how many priorities are there, but I'll go into how it should be done to get it right. I think the first thing that risk and reg functions need to do, or control functions generally, is actually to articulate internally to the management body that this is a priority. And if you again, going back to the ECB priorities, if you read that this year, a point that keeps coming up is we have spoken with firms about this for the past 5 years, and every time we've come back, they haven't really prioritized it. The programs are frozen, it's underfunded, the board doesn't really care about it, people are just sitting there and nothing gets done. So, and I think the onus ultimately, and it is a tough job, of course, but I think the onus ultimately comes down to those heads of functions or the CROs or the COOs in some case, to actually make that case to the board that a program like sustainability or risk data aggregation reporting or resilience is a priority. It's not just a compliance exercise. And if you set that as a priority and truly embed those considerations across sustainability, resilience, or risk data in the decision-making process, in the change management process, or every time you approve a new product, you're taking those considerations into account, I think that's where fundamental or transformational change arises. And it's up to those function heads and the CROs and the COOs who are owning those reg implementation pieces to make that case internally. That's the first one. The second point is to be conscious of the regulatory adaptability question across jurisdictions. And this is particularly important if you're an international bank or whatever financial institution you are. And I think there is misalignment. DORA might say one thing, the PRA's regime might say one thing, the Fed might say one thing, the MAS might say something else. and this is true for any piece of regulation, there is misalignment. Different regulators prioritize different things based on what their local economy or local economy of firms need. And I think there should be a good degree of cross-leveraging of capabilities across jurisdictions, because even though the piece of legislation or regulation might ask for different things, fundamentally you're still solving the same problem. I'm still solving for resilience. I'm still solving for climate risk. And I think those capabilities are still interchangeable. And sometimes, especially if there's a group or subsidiary structure, there will be cases where the group entity might not actually understand what the subsidiary is trying to do or what the branch is trying to do. And that's fair, because it's not a part of their BAU to care about that. But again, I think the responsibility to advocate for that position to your local management body as well as to the group management body to say, this is a priority, I need to do this. Yes, because the regulation's asking me to, but I think it affects us as a firm fundamentally as well. That advocacy needs to happen right over the next 5 years as well.
Adding to that, I think one really interesting thing that's happening at the moment goes back to the technologification issue. When I was at Morgan Stanley, it was an interesting insight. We had a CEO town hall. This was just post the financial crisis. And the discussion was, who are we as a firm? Are we a bank? Are we a universal financial services firm? What are we? And a very interesting way of putting it, I think the CEO spoke, or somebody else spoke at that time at the town hall, was we are a technology firm which does financial services. And that has become so much truer over the last 15 years now. All financial services firms are tech firms who do financial services. They're not financial services firms who have some tech. And that reorientation means that the prioritization of activities, the focus on certain areas has shifted massively over the last 10 years. Firms are focusing a lot more on their technology stack as a source of risk compared to balance sheet or exposures. And that changes the way the organization works. It changes the way you need to focus on certain things. So when it comes to the management body, there's increasing emphasis on making sure that senior management has either access to tech insight, or senior management is comprised of individuals who are technologists by themselves. And that is changing the way organizations run at the moment. The fact that there is increasing scrutiny through Operation Resilience on how technology firms, the Googles, the Amazons of the world, support financial services firms, it's changing. It will change fundamentally the way we operate, because the net is being cast so wide that it's not just regulated firms which are within the ambit, but broader firms, tech firms, critical third-party service providers, which means that firms now need to not only respond on one side to regulators, but they need to work with their suppliers in a much more integrated way to be able to answer questions about their sustainability, their viability. And that changes the way organizations work. So I think that fundamental change will also set up the scene for some conflict between financial services providers and their technology providers, and to a certain extent between technology providers and regulators. Because the objectives of these different firms, these different business models are quite different. It's only over the last couple of years that the technologists and the risk functions are sitting in the same room together. If we ran, say, operational risk workshops 10 years back, it was purely risk functions with some inputs from technology coming in. Now you can't run a workshop like that without the technologists being in the room. And that changes the way organizations behave. That again brings to bear the point of risk culture. Technologists look at risk as an opportunity, and risk functions look at risk as a problem to be solved. And they're two very different worldviews. And when they collide, interesting things happen. So I think that's going to be a theme as well over the next couple of years, how firms manage this transition. Some firms have done well, some firms are still struggling with that. But eventually the winners in the next 10, 15 years would be the firms who would really, really embark on the journey of technologification and work with that.
Okay. And when looking at technology, it's a nice segue onto AI. okay? Because AI is a technology that all firms are trying to grapple with at the moment. I'm going to pass this on to you, Ryan, because I know you're passionate about AI and also very knowledgeable. So I suppose looking at AI, what is the true extent of AI on risk functions?
I think even before we start talking about AI and its impact on risk functions, I think what I would like to touch on first is the way the industry at the moment talks about AI in the first place. And I've attended many seminars and sessions. I've talked to some, both as a speaker and an observer. And one thing I keep hearing as a consistent theme is people are coming in to these sessions saying, yes, AI is a transformational force. It will be a paradigm shift in the industry for risk functions. But what I don't often clearly hear is the why. People are really excited to say, yes, AI will be transformational. They're reaching the right outcome, and I do think it will be transformational. But the why, I think, is unclear, and I don't blame them for not knowing the why exactly either, because I don't think any of us do yet. And the parallel I sometimes draw when I think about the way we speak about AI today is almost like the way financial services as an industry spoke about computers or the internet maybe 40 years ago in the 70s or the 80s. And if you actually go to YouTube and search Wall Street interviews, there's a filmmaker whose name I forget, who did a series of street interviews in Wall Street, I think in the 70s or the 80s. And he went up to people who work in financial services, just walking around on the street, and asked them, how do you think computers will change your job? Or how do you think the internet, or as they previously called it, information society or information technology, how will it influence your job? And the responses they got in those series of interviews is surprisingly similar to the responses we get when we talk about AI today, where people will come and say, oh, I think it's going to be a paradigm shift. I think the way I process my data is going to get so quicker. I think the way I make decisions based on data will be so much quicker. I can report quicker. I can produce documents quicker. And it sounds very similar to the things we're talking about AI these days. And I don't think that's where the transformational shift will actually come from, because I mean, yes, productivity will obviously get enhanced the same way computers revolutionize financial services. But if I take an example of retail banking, for example, 40 years ago or 50 years ago, retail banking is a cumbersome, paperwork-heavy, in-person process where you have to like go into a bank branch, which we still do sometimes to an extent. But fundamentally, if I do retail banking now, I can do everything I need to do on a day-to-day basis off an app. And if I take that statement of computers will fundamentally change my job, can I directly connect it to retail banking happening off an app? Yes, but not directly. I think a series of innovations had to happen on the way for me to connect point A to point B. Someone had to actually invent a phone in the first place, apply the internet to a phone, make sure the risk and controls work in a certain way, the UI works. That's what actually fundamentally transformed the way retail banking works. That's how computers and internet came together to fundamentally transform a sector of financial services. Or even sales and trading, for example. The way people access market intelligence today or execute trades is fundamentally different because of the technology than it was 50 years ago. And I think that is where the transformational shift will come with AI as well. So it's less that AI will have an impact on risk functions and transform it. I think it's more AI is a general theme in the industry. And someone who picks it up and applies it to a practical problem, that's where the transformational shift will come. The internet existed before Amazon, but it's Amazon's sort of use case of saying I can do online shopping, starting with books, and then I scale it up to everything else in the world. That's what transformed it. So I think again, AI is a general theme, and risk functions will continue to exist within it. What are the more practical impacts or perceived benefits? I think the perceived benefits are pretty much well known in terms of it will create efficiencies in terms of reducing a lot of the heavy workload that we do, manual processes. And the Bank of England did a survey a few years ago where they said, what are the top 5 functions who will benefit from the use of AI? And I mean, no surprises, it's the functions which have the most manual work or process-heavy work that will be the biggest users, whether it be risk management, of course, in the top 3, but even something like sort of credit checks or manual processes to check documents. Those manual processes, again, will be the biggest immediate place to gain efficiencies. And that of course, transfers to cost efficiencies or us becoming more competitive as a firm as a result of those efficiencies. And of course, we can't talk about the efficiencies without talking about the risks that will emerge from using these technologies as well. And the risk paradigm, again, is fairly well established, but I'll touch upon some specific themes that are unique for risk functions. I mean, the known risks of using AI in financial services is your classic examples of, is it transparent? Is it explainable? If I use an AI tool for a RCSA process, will the AI tool actually be explainable in how it arrived at specific conclusions? That's a well-known, well-documented shortcoming of AI, or that an AI model might hallucinate and force into giving answers which might not actually be true. Bias and fairness, again, is a major concern. If your AI tools are running on fundamentally biased data, the outcomes it will produce will be biased as well. These are the well-established risks, I would say. The unique bits, I would say, first is the regulatory integration of AI. I think when you apply AI to something as regulated as a risk or regulatory function, we must remember the processes we use AI for will still be under the same pieces of regulation. So if I'm using AI for a customer chatbot, it is still in line with consumer duty in the UK, for example. The AI will still need to apply to the fundamental regulations that apply to those processes already. If I'm using AI that is significantly biased to make credit decisions on who gets a loan or not, it still applies to consumer duty. If I reach an unfair outcome, it's still a problem. So that's, I think, one piece that firms will, again, grapple as they slowly dip their toes into how they use AI. The second risk, I would say, that's unique to risk functions is, how do you actually assess for AI that's not being used by us as a firm, but our suppliers, our third parties, our fourth parties? Because most of the risk discussions we have in financial services is, if I use an AI tool, these are the risks that will come from it. Or are my risk frameworks, do they have AI considerations within them? And I think the question needs to be extended to say, what if someone I use as a supplier is using AI? How am I as a firm assessing that risk? And I'll take a very simple example here. So if I'm using a third-party CV screening software for my HR process, and that uses AI to screen people to condense an applicant list from 1,000 to 10 or 100, if it is inherently biased against people from specific backgrounds, that's a risk I can't even control without actually scrutinizing the supplier who's providing that solution. So I think that opens up a whole new Pandora's box of risks in terms of, how do I assess how my third and fourth parties use AI, and what impact does that have on me? And the third one, and I'll stop with that, is the privacy element of it. And privacy and data security, of course, is well-known risk for AI. But I think if you apply to a financial services context, the extent to which it creates the risk, again, becomes that much more complicated. Because if I have introduced something like an AI, and I don't want to take a specific name, but an AI tool that supports you in a day-to-day processes, a productivity tool, and I'm giving it access to all my systems, I'm giving it access to all my library of documents, do I actually know what I'm giving access to there? Because it seems like I'm giving them access to XYZ folders and XYZ systems and XYZ platforms, but do I actually know what's in those platforms in the first place? If I give it access to an Excel file, do I actually know what's in each of those 10 tabs? I don't know, but the AI is going to read all of it. And I have no control over what the AI does read and does not read. And when that part of I don't know what the AI is reading becomes very prominent, that's where the real security risks start coming. Because me as a risk manager, or as a risk consultant or a governance consultant, my job is to be constructively paranoid for my clients, right? That there are threat actors out there who are out to get us. And if they can exploit those vulnerabilities in technologies people actually don't know how to use completely yet, that's where it gets really concerning.
I don't know who said it, but it was very eloquent. We as a species, our instincts are prehistoric. Our institutions are medieval. And our technology is godlike. And all these three things, when they come together, it's a recipe for potentially disaster. And I'll make a provocative statement. I think we are looking at some sort of significant AI-driven catastrophic event in the next 10 years as a use case for what can go wrong with things. It will go wrong. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when it will go wrong. So, and we can talk about that separately. But when it comes to not specifically risk functions, but organizations as a whole, what we have to remember is from an individual people workforce perspective, humans have significant marginal cost for every unit employed. So every time I have 100 people and I add 10 people onto that, whether in a risk function or otherwise, there's incremental 10 unit cost. And that unit cost has been going up over the last 40 years. Technology, leave the AI component out of it, but technology has zero marginal cost. Once you develop a software, it doesn't matter how many copies you replicate of it, the individual extra cost of implementation and the value creation, the ratio is infinity because the cost is zero and the value creation is always a positive number. So it's always infinite sort of a value realization that you get from implementation of technology. And with AI, that gets on steroids, which means what we'll see from a workforce perspective, from a risk function structure perspective, we will see functions becoming much more lean because human costs has been going up. If you look at the CEOs, the CFOs who are grappling with these, or even CROs actually who are grappling with day-to-day issues, the biggest concern is the component of cost. And to manage the cost, they will deploy AI in much larger numbers as we go along. So if I would say in the next 10 years, risk functions will be cut in half in terms of headcount, I don't think it's a provocative statement at all. Which means that risk professionals of today have to really reorient themselves fundamentally, not to match the value that AI generates, because I don't think humans can match that level of output, but to change the way in which things are done. Give you a simple example. I know we are both interested in watches, right? So let me give you an example. When quartz watches started coming in the 60s or 70s, it was a massive existential threat to the Swiss watchmaking industry because you could get something that gave more accurate time at a fraction of the cost. But the industry revamped itself completely. Mechanical watches, automatic watches still exist in a different realm of consumption. And I think risk professionals will have to go on that journey because their output, their contribution to firms will have to be completely reoriented because some of their aspects of their lives will be irrelevant by the time AI is fully deployed. And that's not only for risk, but we're talking about risk functions, so I think that is a consideration. There's a significant cost benefit to it, obviously, and that's why senior leadership will continue to look at that aspect. So and it's also true for us as advisors or consultants. We need to reorient ourselves to say, what does it mean for our future in the next 10 years? How do we make sure that when our clients need us in these capacities, they can count on us to provide value and not just headcount, because we are also cost. And that has also to be seen in context of the value that we create. Are we going to create more value, not only in relation to permanent headcount, which we are doing now, which is why we are employed, but when AI comes into the picture, and we'll have to move faster as well. So I think there's a fundamental shift that we are looking at, nothing new, but it's a fundamental shift and it will change the way things will happen. In addition to that, Ryan talked about international banks and their operations, right? When markets, economies started becoming more integrated post-World War II, when the financial system started becoming more integrated, the level of outsourcing to different locations, whether it's follow the sun model, whether it's cheaper manual labor from different parts of the world, the level of outsourcing imploded. And the same principle now applies to functions that were outsourced at much lower cost. Now, yes, it's still a lower cost compared to, say, the UK or Europe, but compared to what AI can offer, it's still more expensive. So the impact that we will see on headcount, resource, risk functions, process-driven individuals will not just be in the Western economies. It will go down to every single place where outsourcing is happening. And because there's a huge amount of shift on the risk view of what outsourcing means, because every time, and I'll borrow this phrase again from one of my clients, every time you outsource an activity, you insource risk. So the focus will be, can we reduce outsourcing, bring things back here using technology? We save cost in that location, but we also save risk that we had imported. So I think that will fundamentally change again how financial services firms will operate. They will potentially become more concentrated, leaner, reliant much more on third-party providers in terms of big technology providers, but not distributed individuals or sitting in different locations. And that would mean a completely different set of risk profiles to manage to. So it's interesting times.
So how can these functions balance adopting AI whilst also being mindful of the emerging risks that it can have on their operating models?
It's a deep question. I don't think we have answers to that just yet. But what I've felt, at least, and I don't know if we started the discussion with saying these are all personal views. They do not represent the views of our firm. But what I think, what these recent trends are doing, they are really forcing us to introspect for the reasons for why we do things in certain ways. I think it was fair enough to say between the 70s and 80s and 90s that the pace of change, while fast, was still incremental by today's standards. And so people could adapt, change, and still not be antiquated very quickly. Now, because that threat looms for many parts of organizations, I think it comes down to, do we understand what we do? Do we want to do it? Is there a better way to do it? And then adapt or embrace change on that basis. I think one of the challenges firms face at the moment is that board members are not digitally native, at least in the larger firms. They were born analog and they've adapted digitally. But the people who were born digitally behave, consume, make decisions in very different ways. So their consumers are digitally native and the decision makers are not yet digitally native completely. It will happen in the next 20 years, obviously. So that crossing the chasm is really difficult, really important actually as well. So I think firms are on that self-reflection journey at the moment, and quite a bit of time will be spent in understanding that. The second one, I think quite important again, is to really understand the technologies we are dealing with. I think AI is a buzzword. It gets thrown about. Everybody's excited about it because it's new. It sounds exciting. But how many of us do really understand the use cases of AI in a practical way? And that's where I think we are struggling at the moment. Our clients are struggling at the moment. And it will come down to pass where 2-3 compelling use cases can be implemented when people will really understand how this was going to impact us in a more fundamental way. But my assertion is that understanding will not come again incrementally. Something will explode and we'll understand what just happened as a post facto, not ex ante. To be seen. Yeah. To be seen. I always go back to what was said in Judgment Day, Terminator. It's in our nature to destroy ourselves. And we find out our meaning once we've destroyed ourselves. So I think we'll see some of those events coming up. It's not a very good vision for the future, a bit dystopic. But I think there's something that will happen and we'll react to it, obviously.
I'm glad Terminator is mentioned as a reference in this podcast. That's brilliant.
I mean, if it gets you views, fantastic. But what I found, maybe it's a humorous thing, but it does have some relevance. Stress testing. Scenario analysis. It's the bedrock of financial adequacy assessments. It's the bedrock of operational resilience, right? To look for scenarios and see how we will react or how the world will react around us. And there's no better scenario generation machine than Hollywood. That's the whole purpose, to create severe, implausible scenarios that we can all get excited about. They come up with Contagion in 2012, and then the pandemic happens in 2020. They talk about AI long before, but particularly in Matrix 1999, and AI is reality today. So I will recommend all listeners, viewers, or whatever, to just go back to what Hollywood was doing 30 years back, and that'll be reality next year. So we can use that.
That's a very good point. So, okay, on that note then, what does the future of risk functions look like? You predicted already that risk functions may halve over the next 5 years or so. But is there truly a value add to risk functions in business?
I'll start with something that I learned when I joined the risk function back in Morgan Stanley. In the first sort of workshop that happened, the question was asked. There was an image of a supercar on the screen. The question was, what is the purpose of a brake? It's a simple enough question. The brake helps slow the car down and prevent an accident. But if you think about it, it's deeper than that. A brake allows the car to go faster. If the brake was not there, You would never drive a car above 40 miles per hour if you didn't know that there was a brake. And risk functions are the brakes in the organization. They are there to add value. They are, yes, you can see them as cost functions or cost centers. They add value because they allow the business to be appreciative of the environment that they operate in and control for unchecked growth, which could ultimately harm the organization. So I think risk functions will continue to have that value. They have to perform that function. If risk did not exist or risk functions did not exist, something else would exist because that function needs to be performed. So they will continue to provide that, I think, check and balance and the opportunity for the business to grow. But they will have to, as I said, fundamentally reorient in ways of working. Manuality of processes needs to be fundamentally changed. They will become leaner. Now, we see a lot of pressure from regulators in a number of instances to say capacities need to be built in to manage all these risks that are coming in. But at the same time, if you look at the business imperative, where costs are rising, where there are, of course, incredible challenges, firms will have to find a way to make their functions much more efficient and leaner to be able to deliver what they're delivering with the use of technology. So we will see that happening as well. Ultimately, I think risk functions need to perform the role that external consultants like us provide, which is they need to be trusted advisors to their first lines, to be able to say, we are there to help you, but also limit you when the situation asks, because our interest is the interest of the entire firm. And from a regulatory perspective, not just a micro firm, but the macroeconomic stability of the entire financial system. So I think some of those things will be things to look out for. The third thing, I've been thinking about it, I think the risk functions will be at the forefront of deconstructing the challenges when a catastrophic event does happen. When CS happened last year, risk functions across banks were working in overdrive to understand what really happened out here. What was the causality of the chain of events that led to the collapse of a significant institution which had existed for over 150 years in a matter of a week? It was not about capital. It was not about liquidity. It was much more fundamental than that. And when the next event happens, I think risk functions with their embedded knowledge will have a huge amount of value to add to deconstructing the problem and then solving for the problem for the future. I think there are aspects of problems that we don't know yet because they've not occurred, but they will occur because of some event that will occur, whether it's a cyber attack or something else. We learn from that. And I think risk functions will be at the forefront of solving for that problem.
Okay. So aside from the preventative measures, are they a benefit to growth strategies?
I mean, I think I'll go back to the point of people actually knowing the purpose of their roles here. And I think it goes back to the point of, as Vishwas said, the current generation of senior managers were born analog. They didn't grow up with iPhones, or they didn't start their careers with the technology that we run with today. And as we increasingly technologify the functions, it's also a question of, does the new generation of senior managers, will they actually know a lot of the traditional crafts that we originally started with, things that, as we said, are perhaps more manual or process oriented? And do they actually know, will they actually ever learn how those things are done in the era of automation and going back to the AI as well? Will a senior manager or chief risk officer in 20 years or 30 years, will they actually know what are the considerations that goes into a KYC check because it's now automated? So I think it goes back to the people element of the functions and people really knowing the technical side of it, because ultimately that is what will propel you to be an agent of change in the organization. And it goes back to the risk culture point of, if I can articulate the purpose of the risk function well as an agent of change, as Vishwas said, the brakes of the organization, I think that's the fundamental starting point to actually becoming that agent of change. The function's not just there to run those checks and balances or tick the compliance box, but there is an element of return on risk investment which is like ultimately the CRO's job or the head of function's job to articulate to their management body and actually quantify to say, based on the budget we had for this year, these are the tangible benefits we've produced for the organization, and to clearly make that case that, again, we don't exist just because the regulation asks us to exist. We are actively contributing to the strategic plan of the firm in the next 2, 3, or 5 years.
Okay.
I think there's also one thing to think about in this mix. Actually, two things. One, when it comes to the role of the CRO, I think it's an incredibly challenging role because you have on one side to manage the demands of the business, which, profitability, viability are considerations that the CROs are not aloof to, right? They have to be invested in that as well, while making sure that the animal instincts of an organization are not, unchecked in a way. It's a really difficult spot to be in. The amount of scrutiny on CRO functions, the amount of pressures, both internal and external, are significant. It's one of the most challenging roles in an organization at the moment. So whether we have the right pipeline of talent coming into those roles, whether they are the right individuals with the right mindset, with the right personal resilience as well to manage the demands of that role and manage the potential downsides when things go wrong, because the downsides are significant and they need to be managed as well. I think that's it's a consideration to think of. The second thing I wanted to add was that over the last 30 years, there's a perceptible shift in a philosophy of whether we as firms are seeking efficiency or we are seeking, again, resilience. And efficiency and resilience are not great friends to each other. Efficiency relies on minimizing ineffectiveness, minimizing, in fact, redundancies in the system. And resilience relies on redundancy. It relies on backups. It relies on checks and balances of that sort. And when these two worlds start colliding, the efficiency, which is a financial concept, which is what's the return on investment, return on equity, return on balance sheet, or even risk-adjusted return, compared to we have to ensure that we have resilience in the system, even if it costs us quite a significant amount of money. I think balancing those two things is going to be quite tricky for firms, because firms will have to realize, and they're realizing it's not something that people are blind to, that there are trade-offs to be made. And whether the markets understand those trade-offs just yet, it's a difficult argument just a moment. I think it will take some time again before markets recognize that some firms which have lower financial performance but are more operationally resilient are the ones that we should be backing on a long-term basis. So I think there's some of those things also to that will play into how risk functions will run in the future.
Okay. Exciting time ahead.
Exciting time ahead.
So finally, are there any PRA, FCA or ECB priorities outlined for 2024 that we haven't mentioned already?
There are some priorities I would say are bread and butter priorities, which have been there for a long time and they will continue to be there. And two that I'll call out are the quality of the governance. Whether you're using stone tools or you're using mobile phones, the quality of governance is fundamental to the whole process. So, and that's an area of focus for what is governance about? I'll take the car analogy. Governance is about, you might have a fantastic car, great processes, runs well, you enjoy driving it, but who's in the driving seat? That's what matters. A bad driver can have really bad consequences even with the safest car in the world. So governance is about who's in the driving seat. Can we trust the people to follow the rules, stay in their lane, in the speed limit, and create value? So I think governance is a fundamental ongoing priority. The second one, I think, continues to be credit risk. I think credit risk is an area of focus for regulators. It goes back to demographics, people, their livelihoods, cost of living, and so on. And we will see, because of a different range of reasons, the buildup of credit risk in our societies, in our economies. Continued inflationary expansion has not helped. Cost of living is significantly higher than before. And if AI leads to employment destruction in certain parts of economies, like the coal mines of the past, right? A significant destruction of employment, it will have a real impact on certain sections of society which needs to be managed. So I think those two priorities remain. The one priority that we've not mentioned, but it's come up, I think, in a recent publication from the European regulators, is around digitization as an opportunity, not the risks of digitization, but how are firms thinking about implementing digital solutions in their day-to-day to create value from there. And we are seeing quite a lot of not noise, but conversations around this topic from regulators to say, we're not just telling you, manage the risks of this thing. Are you looking at it as an opportunity? Because you need to look at it as an opportunity as well. So I think those three things I'll mention that we've not explicitly touched upon, but yeah, they're relevant. Ryan?
Nope, I think I'll start for me. Yeah.
We don't envy our clients' workloads. I mean, they are significant. The demands are extensive, but it's a utility that we are working with. It has a much higher purpose than just facilitating a transaction, and the focus will not go away. So, yes, exciting times. There's a lot of fun to be had in this journey, actually, because there's financial services, because, again, going back to the point, because it becomes a conduit to the real economy, a lot of change happens here first. Going back to sustainability, there are two ways to manage sustainability. One, you impact the real economy, or you impact the people who provide the funding to the real economy. And that's what regulators are going with. If you hit these guys first, they will lead to an impact on the other side. And it's much more effective in that ways, right? So we will see exciting opportunities for people who work in this sector because they'll be at the forefront of innovation all the time. I think that's exciting. And by virtue of us being on that side with our clients, I think it's exciting for us as consultants as well to be able to be at that forefront, because we then have to be faster than our clients to be able to add value. So I think it's doubly exciting for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're excited by it as well because we can see opportunities arising, new roles on the market, roles that weren't there 2 or 3 years ago. Obviously, there's been some hesitancy with the political changes that are happening in the world at the beginning of this year, but now there are week in, week out, the recruitment requirements have increased significantly.
So what are you seeing in your world? Because, of course, we work quite actively together. But if you were to think about the trends in the market, you've been in this industry for long enough. What are you seeing? What's changed for you?
Yeah, so I suppose what's changed is the type of roles that are created by organizations. So there's two ways to look at it. It's firstly, the desire to hire is there to bring on the right people, but there is some uncertainty around the role created. Do we create a role and then find the right people to fit into it, or do we find the right people and create a role around them? That's what the CEOs have been tangling with the idea this year, and hence why it was quite a slow start to the year from our end, recruitment wise. But now these requirements are coming in, quick and fast, and yeah, that's every year is different. Last year was a real challenge for everyone in the market, but this year there are signs of positivity, and I reckon H2 definitely will be an uprise in recruitment.
And how do these observations, you would say, compare between the types of organizations you work with? So are these observations consistent across a financial institution, a consultant, or a regulator, or are there is there a next level of depth in terms of how those behaviors vary between these types of organizations?
Yeah, no, the behaviors definitely vary. And I think an organization which is more, has the tech enablement piece, down to a T, will have an advantage in attracting the right people that are more solutions oriented. Those kinds of organizations are going to win that race for talent if they can provide that, if they have a sense of purpose in the way they do their work. So there's been a change and a shift in terms of the boutiques and the big four consulting firms, for example. They may have the manpower, they may have that, but do they have the agility to move quickly the way that clients want people to move right now? And that's how the hiring pattern has shifted over the last 6 months.
I'll add a couple of things to that because we are seeing those trends as well. Firstly, I think the demand for horizontal skills will go up significantly. And that's what we are seeing in our industry as well. When I say horizontal, it's about individuals who are able to solve multiple problems at the same time and not just one deep technical problem. There is the market for deep technical specialists. It will always be there. But because change is coming thick and fast, we need people also who can adapt, that agility point that you mentioned, adapt to that change very quickly. The first thing. Second, it's a market at the moment where skill redundancy is extremely quick. I've spent 18 years now in the industry, 18 next year. I'll become an adult next year. But some of the for some of the newer topics, I'm at par with the person who's a graduate because they've just come out and we're grappling with it. What I know is the why, but the how we are all discovering together. When I hear Ryan speak about AI, for example, it's much more compelling, much more articulate, much more thought through, because we're starting at the same level now. So which means that for individuals, we'll have to treat our workforce in a different way. The number of years of experience become much more discounted based on what you're dealing with, which means two things. First, the people with more experience need to completely reorient their way of working, because there's a potential for that value destruction there, or of course, enabling some value creation if they do the right things. But also, we need to then start empowering the more junior people faster, because they are at the forefront of that change. So I think that needs to be looked at in the mix of how recruitment will go on. And lastly, I would say that the people who will ultimately add value in this dynamic are going to be the people who solve many big problems all the time. Because it's not going to be a world in which we live that we've got one problem and we solve it for the next 30 years, like capital, for example. That world is behind us. We'll have a new problem every 2 years, and we'll need people who can solve those big chunks of problems every 2 years. That's a massive skill uplift. And I think that's where AI or technology would struggle for the time being.
I believe that, but my prediction is AI will be integrated somehow into the recruitment process. I think it'll be more platform-led. I think we'll use AI to identify, candidates' ability to solve problems, because the core skill set will be there, and that could be assessed personally, it could be assessed on paper, but the self-assessment metrics that AI could be used for to assess the ability to solve problems quickly and, to provide that. Do they have that agility? I think AI could be used for that, and there may be a platform for that pretty soon. All right, well, it's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you so much for your thoughts, your time, and I'm sure if the listeners have any questions, both Ryan and Vishwas would be more than happy to answer it. But that's all for the first episode, and thanks once again.
Thank you so
very
much
for having us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you.